Test, test. Wiener monkeys. Loud noises. So when we opened Unity for the first time, we created a project, and we set a directory that that project was in, and we selected some default assets that were going to be in there. If you missed your chance to have that, you can also go, I think it's, no, not export. Import package, and over here you can find those same things. So if you missed character, you can go here and say add characters, or environments, add environments. But first off, let's talk about this layout. We have a couple of views here. The first one is this 3D view. And I always go here first because it's the one that you have to know how to navigate. Unity actually mimics Autodesk's hotkeys in Maya for the most part. So you can middle mouse wheel in and out. You can hold Alt and left mouse button to orbit, or Alt middle mouse to drag in and out. And middle mouse is pan. Very similar. There's a couple other ways that it mimics Maya, such as if we have an object selected, you can hit F to zoom to it, to focus on it, if you will. And also, we have this hierarchy which functions kind of like the outliner in Maya, where you can see all the objects that are in our view. But what's this down here? Well, that's where our Unity gets kind of interesting. This hierarchy view is things that actually exist within this scene. Whereas down here, it's kind of like your sandbox of options that you can use. So down here, you might have the 5 kinds of trees that you modeled. But in your scene, you might have only brought one of them in. And then you might have duplicated that tree 5 times. So up here in the hierarchy view is where all your objects exist. Down here is all the things in your project that exist that you might bring into the hierarchy so you can see them in this 3D view. There's also the inspector over here, which oftentimes has useful settings that you might change. So for instance, we can change this directional light's rotation, scale, and value, just like in 3D program. You can change the type of light it is, and you can set other options as well. This camera view is what's going to happen in the game view. So when we're in scene mode, these 2 windows here, scene versus game, differentiate between what happens when you press play versus your sort of top-down SimCity view where you're placing all these objects. Make sense? Everyone following? So let's add, perhaps, a cube. Just some basic 3D objects, like a cube, a sphere, a cylinder, or a plane. You can go to Game Object, 3D Object, and Cube. And that's going to create one over here in the hierarchy. And if you hit F, you can zoom to it. And just like in Maya, you can scale these, rotate them, so on and so forth. Not very complex, right? Under here, you'll notice a couple of things in the inspector, which are various attributes that are on this, or components, that affect what this cube looks like. So the transform component determines that it has a place in 3D space. The cube is sort of the mesh, so very similar to what we were talking about in Maya. Objects hold information. So there's the object level, and then there's the mesh level underneath that, which has all the mesh view. So here you might be able to change this from a cube object that has, say, a Pokemon mesh. Box Collider is on here by default, and it just is one type of collider. There's many others. And Box Collider is a nice, simple one that works really well with this because it'll scale the collider to fit the object bounds. And the mesh renderer just determines how this renders and other stuff. You can see that we also have the default material on here. We can make a new material by perhaps going into, under Assets, let's create a new folder here in the project view called, I don't know, My Assets. Then we could create a new folder called Materials. And inside of here we can right click and create a material. Create, and way down here is material. So in the Assets folder, which is sort of this top level, I right clicked and said create a folder, and I just named it My Assets using camel case, which I don't think is correct for Unity, but whatever. Then I created a folder called Materials, which might differentiate from a folder that said Mesh or something. And then I right clicked and created a new material. So let's click on this material and look at some of the settings here. It's got a standard type, and what's really great about Unity 5, especially for this project, is almost all shaders that you might need to do can fit into this standard shader now. So we don't need to mess with a lot of things. We're just going to probably use this for everything in our scenes. If you want to get into these are fancier. Ask Matt how to use them.
You have to ask, like, my material is only shaded out. You have to add that?
So did you right click and say create material? So we're not looking at the material that's on the cube yet. The cube starts off with a material on it called default material, which is kind of like Lambert 1 in Maya. It's a material that has certain settings, and you're not actually supposed to touch it or mess with it. We're creating a new material in this folder we made by right-clicking, create, and material. Now, albedo is a fancy word. 3D people always like creating new words for things that exist. But this basically means local color. And local color means that, you know, if you have an apple and you shine a blue light on it, it still had a local color of red. You know, it might not render that, or if you color picked off of it, it might appear brown or purplish based off of whatever lighting scenario you're using. But its local color is the albedo. So that's the dumb new word they use. I'm going to click on this swatch and change it to a little red. Or you can use this color picker. And what's kind of cool is when you click on the color picker, you can pick off of any part of your 3D scene or entire UI. I can even go off screen. So I can color pick off of the blue Windows toolbar down here and get a nice blue color. Ooh. These metallic and smoothness attributes are kind of fun. Metallic basically determines various things. But what's cool to see about this is how this shader builds in right from the start. That you pretty much always have this Fresnel angle, which you guys have heard me babble about a lot in the past. It's another one of those stupid words that 3D people made up, like albedo. But it basically means a rim light. And as this material turns to the edge, it has a different material property. So if I go all the way to no metallic and no smoothness, you get almost no Fresnel angle change in its material. So these things, normal map, height map, blah, 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 we can play with those later. But for now, let's see how we can apply this to our cube. If we select our cube in the hierarchy, where it actually exists in the 3D scene, we could click on this, we can right-click on this material swatch and say select shader to change it to a different one. Well, that's awful. And I think I actually instead went to the code. But we can also left-click and drag onto an object, either in here or what have you. So now this has our blue material on it, right? Very, very simple stuff so far. Again, apologies, teach you a wide range of skills here. If you already know this stuff, start digging around in the environment shaders and or the environment assets and start looking at them. So if you want to know how this looks so far, you can hit play. And there it is. There's the camera. So when you hit play, you can you jump to the game window, and you can actually be in the scene view while you're playing. And you can actually hit pause and move around here to see like the state of your game as you're playing it. But the dangerous thing about this is that any changes you make while it's in this are not going to have an effect. So make sure you unpause and go back to your scene. Now let's try and ship a game really fast. This is the simplest game you'll ever make. In your assets folder, way up here at the top, down in the project view where you can see all your assets, double click on standard assets. Oh, and by the way, you can change the view of this by dragging this little slider. So I think way down at the bottom, it's listing the folders and the full name. So a lot of times that's handy because you can see the full path. So I'm going into standard assets, character, which is where we're going to find that character asset package. And here you can see first person character, third person character. If we double click on first person character, you can, if you're confused, look at this path here and just follow that path to the same stuff. And I can go to prefabs, and there's this thing that says first person controller and rigid body first person controller. I'm going to click on this rigid body first person controller and drag it into this hierarchy. So this is a clone of whatever is over here. And it's going to create it in some wonky space like this. And you can immediately see how this changes your game by pressing play. Which is, now you can look around with first person controls and see that we're falling from space. So instead, let's fix our placement in 3D. So I'm using the transform box on the rigid body first person controller over here. And I'm going to move it above this little cube. And you'll notice that this has a rigid body collider on it, whereas our cube has a box collider. So hopefully this means it doesn't fall through now. Look at that. Now when I press play, I'm standing on a box. Wow. So cool, guys. So this is the suicide game where you jump off a cliff and die. It's a game about the pressures of modern society and the slow curdling ennui of daily life. It's a Criterion Collection game. Alright, everybody have this so far? What do you need? Let's see. So try clearing out the channel boxes here. You're getting 3D lost in the desert itis, which happens all the time to everyone. Yeah, you can do that. So now hit F to zoom in on that. Rotate it out of the channel box. So now you can see there's your cube. Your cube has 50 transforms also. And yeah, but look over here. Position blah blah blah. So change that to 0, 0, 0. Okay, so now you just need to move it above this so that when it falls, it lands on there. So try hitting play. So automatically jump and look down at your feet. You're standing on it. Now jump off and look up at it as you fall to your doom. ASWD. ASWD is move, and spacebar is, and then mouse is look around, just like traditional first-person shooter. You hate this? Right. They'll get that.
It takes a while to get used to,
So,
especially if you're
unplay. So your cube is there. If you want, you can scale it. So use W, E, and R, and you can scale it up, and then maybe scale it up and then down on the Y-axis. So that works. And now grab your rigid body first-person controller and move it up in space. And now hit play. That's fine. Look at that. You're standing on your cube. Now jump off and follow your doing. ASDW is so you move around with the doing. Traditional first-person controller. And now you can look up with the mouse and see yourself or your cube. Everyone else there?
I could mine work.
It's fun, man. You should, you know James Gurney? He's the guy who did Dinotopia, and this is, he does all his like,
I have his book right here.
gorilla sketching with that, with these. He also uses like, I think he also has one that'll fill with ink, so for black, and use that to block in backgrounds really fast. Yeah, that guy. He's super friendly, by the way. Friend him on Facebook, ask him questions, and he'll respond to you, which is.
Phil worships that guy.
I do too.
We talk about him in digital painting concept art.
He's like, he posts so much good information on his blog. I think James Gurney has an understanding of his place in history, which is a lot of the greatest artists in history got that way because they left a legacy not only as a teacher, but as an artist. And by teaching, you get, this is something I'm really liking, by the way, is you get a lot more impetus to go and draw and do projects because you have to like go show them to your class. So I'm drawing a lot more. Phil said he's doing the same.
Oh yeah, Phil has a lot of really, really cool stuff he's been doing, I think.
Yeah. So everyone's able to fall on this cube and jump to their doom and look up at it?
Yes.
All right. So in a first-person shooter, which is what this controller is, ASDW moves you forward, backward, left and right. So this is ASDW, back, forward, left, right. And then your mouse changes how you look. So also, W for forward plus your mouse can change how you sort of look at stuff. So if I fall off the edge, I can look up. And then it doesn't always appear there.
So is it the material that's making the character slide a bit, or is it...
No, I think it's the rigid body controller. Actually, yeah, I think it's the character. It just has some changes. And if you click on this rigid body FPS character, if you affect it down here in the prefab, so first-person character, first-person character, prefabs, here's your FPS controller. If you change it over here, it'll scale over to the one that's in the hierarchy. If you change it on the hierarchy character, it's not going to have that effect. It's going to instead just exist in this temporary state version of it over here. So we're going to get into that more as well. So yeah, you can change all these speeds here. Like you can change your walk speed to 1 and your run speed to 1. You can change your jump speed to 1,000.
I think the reason why is because the rigid body one has a zero friction material on it.
Yeah, it might actually have some slide to it, which is kind of cool.
It's got a zero friction material on it, that's why.
Ah, cool. So let's say you're done, right? Now we go File, no. Yeah, File, Build and Run, and you get this window, which is Build Settings. We're going to say PC, Mac, and Linux standalone. You can say what you want for these. There's other things you can add, but I think this is fine for the most part. You can change the player setting. such as the resolution. You can say always be big. You can add a splash image, stuff like this. And again, to modify settings on things, it always comes up in the inspector over here. But we don't really need to change anything. You can add an icon if you want, maybe. Such as, yeah, I'll add this guy here. Oh, and you have to save your scene first. So I will say File, Save Scene, which is going to save this current state of the hierarchy over here. And I can save this in My Assets in a new folder called Scenes. So you have to be able to select which scene you want. So then you say Add Current, and when you saved your scene, now that's available, right? So again, I saved mine to My Assets, Scenes, just as Game. And then I said Add Current, which maybe that gives you a prompt to save. And if I say Build and Run, it asks me where I want to save this. I'll just save it to the desktop, because I love bad naming conventions. Best game ever.exe, and build it. Woo! This is more complex than it needed. We haven't used any environment assets in that environment package. But the point I'm trying to show is that Unity is really, really awesome, because you can know very, very little about any of the stuff you just did, and you were still able to ship a game. Or did you? Quick, to the whiteboard. Let's draw pictures.
Nope, too late.
Wow.
Oh, no, you still, oh, never mind.
So then it launches the build settings, and you can say we want to do this at gigantic. And hit play, and it gives you a Unity splash screen. Look, here I am on my cube. Ooh.
Best game ever.
And then you sell this on Steam for $10.
No, you go early access for $10, and then you beat it up for about 8 months, and then you take everybody's money.
And then just never
And then
ship
you
the
throw it
game.
away.
Whee! Bye, son.
How do you respond?
I think
You have
I
to like script it and respond.
think you have to like
Okay.
leave the game and right click over here. That
Use Playmaker.
close window.
It's easier.
Alright, so that's how you ship a game. And now you're a game designer, and go forth and have a job or something. Like there's jobs in the game industry. I'm so pessimistic.
Someone's got to be.
I mean, there was an NPR article that I saw that I really liked, which was about some really fancy music school. It's like one of the top in the nation, and the violin teacher, who's again training many, many violinists at once who are part of like a pit orchestra. Like he started adding to his lessons that there would be a job for 3 of them playing violin at the end of it, just so that they would have this realistic expectation that, you know, take the bottom 80% of students, and you know, they don't play violin after this. They probably, you know, weren't playing enough to begin with, which is why they don't get good enough to be one of the top 3 that do get jobs as violinists. But you should be very, very honest and very, very terrified about how hard you should be working at this shit. Again, I'm drawing every moment I can get. Not every moment, but as much as I can, because it's good for you. So we all shipped a game now, right?
Yeah.
That's so great. Well, for now, we can delete our cube. Aww. And we don't have to get rid of our first-person controller, but I'm going to move it up in space a little. And we're going to start looking at some of these nature assets to try and reverse engineer them. So if you go to Standard Assets, Environment, you have all these different things: water, Speedtree, terrain assets. Let's go into terrain assets and surface textures. All this is some examples of textures. If you right click on these, you can say show an importer or show an explorer, and it'll take you to where they are. And you can open them up and look at them. Again, you're not allowed to use these, but they are a good example of what I'm hoping you'll aim for. So only one of these has a normal map, but you know. Oh, this is the one I want to look at. Photoshop taking hours to load because it's a really slow program.
Picture up today.
Should be Photoshop streams.
Well,
Want my royalties.
like I'll play music, but for Photoshop.
So if you look at this texture, I want to show you one thing first, which is a thing that you use in lots of game engines, but Unity is no different. When you save this, you save it as RGBA, and oftentimes if it's rocks, you're not going to see through it, so you don't need A for alpha. So what you end up doing is using this as a Y space management, and you store in your alpha channel your specularity map. Also, let's see if this is nice and seamless. Let's say offset by 256, 256. Look at that, it's a seamless texture. You should be able to do all these things. We're going to do maybe one or two in class today. You'll notice, and you can tell this by the naming conventions, and why not just copy their naming conventions, that some of these reference a specular map, others don't. The grass that they have does not, because you probably don't need specularity for grass as much. It's lots of tiny blades, it's scrubby, it's just absorbing all the light on an occlusive layer. But same thing, if you hit control, ooh, their grass has a seam. You guys see that? I agree. So upset now.
I wrote a very strong word letter.
I'm gonna blast him on Twitter.
There was a seam.
Your seamless texture wasn't so seamless.
It seems to me somebody needs to be fired.
I knew someone was gonna make that joke.
They're gonna write
Yeah.
it just like, go home.
Well, what are you doing?
Just like, are you
I don't care, Windows. Go away.
I can't tell.
So here's something that's interesting. They end up not using a normal map in the truest sense for the rocks, the mud normals. But I think the reason is because they just color it, and that way, so you see this checkbox, create from grayscale? The benefit of that is that then you don't have to worry about seamless texturing on normals, which is oftentimes something that's very, very painful. Alright. So if we go back from surface text to billboard textures, we can see that they have two textures here, which are grass frond alpha and grass frond albedo alpha 2. Show an explorer. And I'm going to drag one of these into Photoshop. I'm going to drag one of these into Photoshop because I wanted to show you a couple things. So first off, why are they using this weird green background with all this strange like strippiness instead of just having a ping where, if this was a ping, we could say there's no background, and then we just grab our giant grass brush like a noob, like the noobs you are, you noobs. And we select a nice green color. Oh, a nice green color.
It's a nice green.
Oh, this is in.
I don't think
I think it's in the wrong color scheme. Yeah, it's in. So this grass brush, I think, goes between the background and the foreground. Hey, look there. Why don't they just do that? Well, first off, this looks like shit. But second off, there is actually some under the hood stuff happening here. What happens is, if you look at this, a ping does not save out an alpha channel. Instead, it has an explicit one that's on the only layer in the file. And what this means is that if this pixel is 0, 0, 0 for RGB values, that doesn't have any green in it. But this has green. So how does it blend between a transparent pixel of no alpha and 0, 0, 0 color, because there's none that can be explicit, and this green? Well, it basically is going to add in a white or a black edge into there, and you don't want that. It's one of those. I mean, maybe this is too obtuse right now, but trust me, you'll notice it if you do it wrong. So you end up using this sort of look for your textures, and instead you save your alpha as a channel like this. So actually, I'm going to select this alpha channel, and really fast, I'll actually delete this and save it as a ping. And then you can possibly see this in real time. So I'll save this as a ping. Blah, blah, blah. There, I saved it. You'll notice over here, it updated. Have this one. What is the background? Instead, it's white. This is going to matter when we start placing these grasses, and you would notice it. Anyways, you guys seeing how these are the assets you should look to and possibly try to emulate in your own workflow? The next one is going to be the really fun one to emulate, which is the Speedtree assets. So Speedtree is a big tree license thing, which we're not going to use. Maybe in the future you'll be on a project where you use it, and you'll never have to model a tree again after this class. But I hope that for this class you can. And also I want you to look at how they organize their tree assets, because they're actually quite good. So let's drag this asset over here, this little group here, in Broadleaf Desktop. And here we can preview it. Oh, it's so pretty, huh? Oh, so pretty. Let's drag that in over here. Happy tree. I'll make up little stories about these trees. And we can start to look at this. The first thing we're going to look at is actually the geometry, because there's some interesting things you'll note about the geometry. Go from shaded to wireframe, and try to zoom in on this tree. Now there's a couple things that we don't care about, such as that collider. And also, what's that? It's up here under Scene. There's a little pull-down menu that you can change your draw method. So you can see alpha channel. Mip maps, yeah. So these ones are for like checking problems, I think. Let's look at shaded plus wireframe, or wireframe. Yeah, let's go to wireframe. So what's really interesting about this is, first off, you'll notice that a lot of these, such as this face right here, are triangulated. Back in the 3D program that these were created, these two triangles would have been a face. And that's sort of one thing that you have to do. Again, supposedly there's like a friendly ghost who leaves gaming assets on the computers here in the student directories. And you can go download Diablo 3 characters and check out how master modelers modeled them. Try to copy what they're doing and learn about why you suck by comparing yourself to people who are actually really good. You'll notice something else, which is they have these like stump assets, and if you go up to here, the branch assets. The branch assets and the stump assets are not explicitly modeled to connect them. They're just stuck in there. When we go to shaded mode, If you look really, really hard, sometimes you can find these, but usually it blends pretty well.
Don't they fix that using textures too?
They might. But I can see a little bit. Now see, you can see the seam right there. Now lastly, on the geometry side, we have how they distribute these polygons. And I'm going to look inside of here. You can click on specific ones, such as a level of detail, and it'll show you just these. So what they're doing here is essentially mapping one of those alpha cards, so those targets we saw where they have the alpha channel, they're mapping these onto polygons. And then they're designed to sort of look at the camera. And I think these low ones are just flat planes that have been turned into 2 triangles each. But some of these higher polygon ones are, you can kind of see how they model these. So they're modeling these off of something. Well, I'll do this on Photoshop. Where? Shit, dog, I'll do it in Maya, where we actually might create these. And Maya already crashed.
You can use it. It saw that you were using other programs. I got jealous.
Oh, you want to use it in Maya? Frick you, I'm going to use Blender. Alright.
Do you know, I have these weird ball things that have showed up on the tree.
Those are colliders. So, you can. They're not going to be required for the trees that you guys make. It's basically so that you can have this tree like blow in the wind, I think.
I can't get rid of mine.
Oh, we'll get to that in a moment.
You have to remove the component on.
Alright. So here in Blender, so the way you would model these tree polygons is sort of this cross section, and then just organically pull it up a little bit so that this has some convexity to it. Concavity.
I did something weird that I can't get rid of. I even tried making it into anything.
Go to shading.
Sorry, I'm not trying to.
So click off of it, just that.
The ball thing.
Oh, those are your collision objects. Yeah, sure. You can delete them.
It was made mainly just to like.
How did I
tree
get those
without
on there?
It's part of this prefab. So they have, this is a tree that's all set up. It's basically like a production-ready shipped tree.
What happens like she doesn't see hers, but I see mine.
That's because she doesn't have her selected.
I have one selected right now.
No, you have like the branch selected.
Wait, how did you get that?
Yeah.
Because you dragged the whole folder desktop over there. Yeah.
Isn't that what I was supposed to do?
I don't know. No, she has the big ones.
She's probably just selecting the ones that are like specifically on the
Yeah.
branch.
So some of them represent.
There you go.
See, there you go. Yeah. So she if you select the whole broadlink desktop, you'll see everything in this group.
I have the whole folder selected.
Yeah.
when you have
So
that-
there you can see everything selected.
No, when you go down, so I have a full folder selected. And then as you go down and select the different subject folder, it changes your.
Now if you click on any one of these LODs, you can sort of find where, which ones are using what. This one uses leaves 3, which is over here. And if you click on it, you can find it over here. So now I can right click and say, show an explorer. I'm just going to copy this and paste it over here. I think it's this one. So in 3D, there's something called a texture atlas. And again, we covered a little bit of this, and it's something where you're going to split your time between two different subjects. One is going to be tiling seamless textures, which are like the grass that goes into infinity. And the other thing is going to be these texture atlases, where you're going to have stuff that doesn't work in that sensibility so much. So if I go like this is essentially what that object is, but in 3D. Shade smooth. Again, just imagine this is Maya. They add just enough polygonal difference so that you can, it's not a flat plane and turns invisible when it's turned like this. And another thing that they do sometimes is, maybe they fixed it. It's broken on my home build, but I was having problems last night getting this to shade on both sides of a face. You can see it's not perfect. There's like a branch that's not connected.
Yeah, these alpha cards are interesting.
Yeah. So when you model this, you'll notice what I did is you end up wanting one polygon or one vert to be at the origin of this plant. And then when you would model this, you would say this is your origin of the object. So you can see that now this is at that point. And then when you spawn it, it'll spawn from this point. Again, we're still just looking at how these other people made assets, and we're going to model some stuff later, but that's a bare bones idea of it. So I wanted to talk about how they're breaking this up. And again, if you look at some of the materials on this, you can notice two different things. They're using, let's go to the trunk actually. So they're using two different materials. One is for this trunk, one of these is this tiling texture. And you can see it right here. So this tiles infinitely, and you know it's designed to be a long strip. And they have a quick normal map that's based off of it. Alternatively, they have these stump objects, which have a different material. I'm trying to find which one that is. But so for the stump object, this is a sudden part of the tree where it would not make sense to tile infinitely. So they add this stump to the texture atlas for this tree. So on the stump faces, they map this, or they would put that material on it. And for the tree faces, they would put the branches. Wait, maybe it's this one. No. This is mildly coherent sounding so far. So what I'm trying to get across is their modeling pipeline is you have a tiling texture that gets you 90% of the way there for the trunk. And then you have a texture atlas that would end up being for these small detail things like these end trunks. And also things that don't tile infinitely, such as these for the branches. And you can have two or three, even three if you want. And that way you can have some variety in your choices. And then lastly, they have some normal maps and other things that enter into this, which for the most part, end up being just generated using Crazy Bump or Insane Bump or X normal, or basically all the things that turn a bitmap into a normal map. We get some shiny specularity. And I bet if we go to this texture for this, I open this in Photoshop, you can check, and yep, they use an explicit, so this is the one thing that's interesting is you end up having to use an explicit alpha channel to represent alpha, so you can't hide your specularity map in there, right? But I'm curious. However, they do have this. So you can, in your normal map, store an alpha channel, and I think there's a way you can have that end up being the specularity. If you look at these materials, they'll have a little notation that represents it. So base RGB, and then the transparency is A. And these ones, they actually do use nature/Speedtree, which is the specific shader for it. Alright, let's take a 5-minute break, and when we get back, we're going to use the terrain editor to start making a terrain and look at how we can blend two textures together.